Thank you all so much for having me and for organising such a wonderful night. I'm really excited to talk about all things hollow and all things that glide. So thank you. I'm going to talk firstly about what is a hollow, what species use hollows and why, some of my research on these topics, and also how we can protect and restore hollows. Firstly, what is a hollow? I'm sure everyone here knows what a hollow is, but Webster's dictionary defines it. The definition of a hollow is simply that they are cavities formed in the trunk or branches of live or dead trees. And to think about hollows is that they can be rather beautiful, they can be in enormous trees or small trees, and once you start studying them or being more aware of them, you can't stop seeing them. So I can't go for a bushwalk now without going, oh, that's a really nice hollow. Ooh, that's a really nice hollow. And I can't stop myself from admiring all these hollows. Now, scientists don't like to keep things simple. Hollow isn't just a hollow, there's actually many different types of hollows. So firstly, we have trunk main hollows, hollows in the trunks of the tree. Then we have trunk top hollows. These ones I don't think are very nice because they're like spouts and they often face the sky directly. So rain can get in, which isn't quite nice if you're living inside. Next, we have branch middle hollows. These aren't as common. They form somewhere along a branch and they're often quite small, like this one here. And then we have branch end hollows, which often form when the branch breaks at some point. We also have fissures, so they can be cracks in the tree, but they can also be important habitat where simply the bark meets the tree for microbats and little species like that as well. And this one's a favourite for little kids when they learn about this one, the butt hollow. And butt hollows are really, really cool. Indigenous Australians actually targeted to create these kinds of hollows because they were excellent for storing food and in some cases even making a jail. If with enough time and energy, you can create these amazing caves inside of trees. So how are all these different types of hollows formed? Well, there's lots of different things that can happen, either in isolation, but often through a series of events and in combination with each other. So a lightning strike, a heavy storm can come through and snap branches. Cockatoos can come along and start nibbling and making hollows. Fire, termites and fungi also play a role. Often in conjunction, all these factors add up to create these hollows. Now, I wanted to bring a little bit of attention to the cockatoo in particular because my colleague Megan, she was on her walk to work and she came across all this debris on the ground and she was wondering what on earth happened here. Did some arborists come through and do some chainsaw work? Like, why would they leave all this mess on the ground? And she looks up and it's just one single cockatoo going ham on this tree. And they have the bite force of 350 psi, and to give that a bit more context, that's actually stronger than the bite force of a Siberian husky. So a really strong dog, they have a bite force of 320 psi. So the beak of a cockatoo is quite incredible and quite a tool. Now, how long do all these hollows take to form? Well, when we consider the life cycle of a tree, we can start from when they are a seed, but there's lots of factors going on. So the soil condition, the history of that tree as it grows, the climate, the tree species itself. It's hard to say exactly how long it takes. There's lots of different factors at play. But on average, we have these trends where it'll take a few weeks for a eucalyptus seed to germinate, a few months for it to become a pretty strong seedling. Then we have to wait about 50 years for it to become a big, strong, mature tree. Then generally after 100 to 150 years, you start to see hollows forming. And after 250 years, perhaps the tree dies, but they can obviously live for a lot longer. But even when a tree dies and it's still got hollows in it, it's still fabulous habitat. And when that tree falls on the ground, those hollows in the ground are also amazing habitat for ground-dwelling species. So the life of a hollow doesn't just end when the tree dies, it continues to provide habitat for species right up until eventually that tree, that stag, that fallen tree has fallen apart. Just to visualize over time, once we get these structure in the canopy and we got this mature canopy, you see this big change happen where as the branches get thicker and stronger, they're also starting to form the hollows. So even when they're getting towards the end of their life and they become half stags and full stags, so a dead tree, that's still really important, having these size and aged hollows as well. Now, for small hollows, they can provide habitat for a little animal called a feathertail glider, which is about the size of a 50-cent coin. So that could take up to 100 years to actually form for this little animal. Next, if we consider a galah, so a hollow about the size of 2 tennis balls, that could potentially take up to 200 years to form. And we look at something like cockatoo species, like the palm cockatoo, and they need massive hollows that are about the size of a milk crate, and they can take up to 300 years to form. I thought we could play a bit of a game where I'm going to put a species on the screen, and you raise your hand if you think that animal uses hollow, and keep your hand down if you don't think it uses a hollow. First species, Australian wood duck. Hand up if you think it uses a hollow. Good work. Surprisingly, they do. This is where they lay their eggs and raise their young inside, and eventually those little chicks will just have to, sometimes they're 8 meters high and they just plop out and they're totally fine. Nature's amazing. Next species, the Australian owlet nightjar. Hands up if you think this animal uses hollows. Excellent. Well, if you have your hands up, you're a winner. They also use hollows. This next one's really easy, and I think I should be seeing a consistent result from you guys. Brush-tailed possums. Yeah, that's what I like to see, a wave of arms. Absolutely do they use hollows. And in fact, I have a lot of first-hand experience with these guys. They sometimes fuel my nightmares, because I will be climbing up a tree, not thinking that there's anything up there, and suddenly gets me every time. What about a wombat? Do wombats use hollows? A few people have put their hands up. You're right. That was a bit of a tricky one, but yes. One time I was in Tasmania, in fact, and I was looking in fallen trees and the logs, looking at all those hollows, looking for quolls, and then suddenly I just came face to face with this wombat, but he was fast asleep, so no screaming there. What about huntsman spiders? We've got a few very serious nods, and unfortunately, yes, they do use hollows, much to my disgust, because when I put my face inside of hollows seeing what's home, I do not want to find a nest of huntsmans, but that has happened. What about Indian minor birds? Do they use hollows? Yep, so we've got a few people in the back saying yes, and you are correct. They also use hollows. And unfortunately, as an invasive introduced species, they compete with other natives for the use of hollows. They can be quite problematic. Lastly, and there's clearly a pattern going on here, so if this was an exam test, I think you'd definitely get this question, right? Do skinks use hollows? Well, yes, they do. I've gotten on lots of motion sensor cameras set to monitor hollows, lots of skinks using them as a temporary shelter, either to escape a boiling hot day to help them regulate, or potentially to just have a rest where it's safe and a predator can't get them. In total, there are 304 vertebrate species in Australia that use hollows. We have 86 mammal species that use these hollows. We have 111 bird species, 78 reptiles, and 29 amphibian species. Now this equates to 90% of our parrot species, nearly half of our microbat species, 90% of all of our owl species, 100% of our tree creepers, and of our gliders. So, why do all these animals use hollows? Well, there are three main reasons. Firstly, they use them as a den space, so a place where they can sleep and rest inside of, nice and safe. They can use hollows as a source of protection from predators. And really importantly, it's a safe place where they can raise their young and reproduce. So what makes a den inside of a hollow suitable for a species? Well, because they all have different biologies and requirements, there's different factors that play. Is it a live or dead wood? The entrance size is really important. You don't want a massive hole if you're a tiny little species. And the thickness of the bark, the aspect, and the depth. So all these factors work together to make a hollow suitable. And in some cases, they're even suitable for humans from Poland, and I would like to live in there. It looks very warm and cozy. Now, inside a hollow, one of the factors I mentioned was depth. And so in this study, if we look at this top thick line, that's the ambient outdoor temperature. It got close to 40, but the deeper the hole is, at the time of day when it's the most hottest, we find that it's able to buffer against those really hot temperatures. So depth is a really important factor, especially in Australia's hot climate, and on really cold nights, you want some kind of thermal buffering happening. And this is just an example of a ringtail possum inside of its den, inside of an artificial hollow that I set up. Little cutie. Now, hollows also provide a source of shelter as protection from predation. We've got powerful owls eating greater gliders, goannas coming up to steal eggs, quolls able to climb way up into the canopy, and surprisingly, sugar gliders are also a bit of a threat in Tasmania. It might surprise you, they are a predator to a whole bunch of endangered parrots. So swift parrots and orange-bellied parrots are being gobbled up by sugar gliders, which is quite concerning. They're an introduced species to Tasmania. They were brought over as pets. They're not native. They haven't been in Tasmania for however many tens of thousands of years. And so they found a niche, they exploited it. And with the lack of hollows in Tasmania because of logging and a whole series of development and things, they're competing for hollows, and sugar gliders are coming in and interacting and making use of the parrots and the eggs and the chicks as a source of food. So that's an example there of a swift parrot nest and a sugar glider coming in, unfortunately, to gobble them up. Another example of a video of a predator investigating a hollow is this goanna here. And this is a hollow that a yellow-bellied glider was using, and I just love the way it just slides on in. Luckily, no one was home, but it must have left a scent or something, because the next day, some galahs decided to come over and inspect the hollow to see if they could raise their young in there, perhaps. I think they could smell the goanna. Just a heads up, these galahs are loud, so it's brace yourselves. I hope you can all appreciate that the camera shook, because that's how loud the galahs were. And they were trying to scare away anything that was in there, in case, it was inside. And lastly, the third reason why Australian animals use hollows is to raise their young. So just some examples here of powerful owls up here, greater gliders and kingfishers. A common question I get is, well, how many hollows do these animals need? And there's been lots of study, decades of research, and it's hard to pinpoint one number. But I do have one word. It's very simple. Lots. We need lots and lots of hollows. I thought I'd give you an example of just how many we might need in one little ecosystem, in one little scene here. So in this little woodland, very picturesque, we've got lots of species coexisting. We might have some mountain brush-tailed possums, and one individual possum can use up to 23 hollows in its lifetime. A greater glider will use up to 18 hollows itself, and they kind of use multiple hollows because they can't be reliant on the one, competing with others. They don't want predators to know that they're constantly going to the same thing, training them up. So they've got to be on their toes. They're moving through the habitat with their home ranges and their territory. They don't want to have to keep moving, going a kilometre journey back to the same home. They've got multiple homes and always got protection somewhere from wherever they are in the landscape. Spotted-tailed quolls will use up to 20 different dens as well, and caves, but also hollows too. Antechinus will use 18. Glossy black cockatoo might use 12 throughout its lifetime for different breeding events. Same with rainbow lorikeets. And we even got to think about the fish and the guppies. Fallen trees inside of rivers and lakes and things like that. They also provide hollows where they, especially young fish and young guppies, can go inside of to find protection. So some temporary shelter there. All up, that's 118 hollows just for one of each of these species. And that's not all the species that would be here. And say on average it takes 240 years for a hollow to form. That means that there's 27,000 years worth of hollow formation in just this one little patch of habitat. Now, paper has gone on to say that we need 30 hollows per hectare to support a rich mix of species. So you want different ages of trees, therefore different sizes of hollows to provide that diversity of species. But if we were to take a landscape such as the Blue Mountains World Heritage Area, that is over 1 million hectares in size. It's basically saying that we need almost 31 million hollows in that one landscape to provide habitat for all these species. So you can just imagine how many hollows there must be in Australia. Probably close to or over 1 billion. And you can think just how much has been lost if we've lost huge stretches of forest over the past 200 years. That could be billions, definitely millions of hollows lost.